Hello, good evening. My name is Lynn Wilson. I'm the Vice President of Myositis Support and Understanding, and I want to welcome you to one of our Awareness Month session, this one with CSI on IG therapy. I want to start by introducing our I'd like to introduce first James Sheets, who's Doctor of Pharmacy and CEO of CSI Pharmacy, and Michelle Vogel, MPA, who's the Vice President of Patient Advocacy and Provider Relations with CSI.
I think Michelle is going to get our presentation shared for us. She's going to be master of the slides tonight, controlling it from her end. And we're both really excited to be here. So we appreciate the invitation by Jerry and Lynn and by Myositis Support and Understanding. This is my first webinar. So and Michelle's done several of these, probably a dozen over the years, I'm not sure. But this is my first, and so this is a little bit unique as compared to presenting in front of a group. So we'll see how I can do this, but I really like the way it's starting. So as Lynn said, my name's James Sheets. I'm a pharmacist. I'm here with Michelle, who's our VP of Patient Advocacy. She has decades of experience in that area and working with patient communities. And we wanted to speak about IG therapy and how that, specifically IG therapy and myositis. And I'm going to focus more on, what is immune globulin therapy and how can it be individualized to give you the best possible outcomes. And then Michelle's going to come in behind me and really get to the probably the most important part, which is how to ensure your insurance plan covers it and picking insurances, some updates on the industry and supply itself. I've worked with IG therapy or immune globulin therapy for almost 20 years. I've got one more year, and then I'll be a 20-year veteran in working with immune globulins, mainly autoimmune disorders. And so, as a pharmacist, I was familiar with the word myositis just because I was active, but honestly, I didn't have a lot knowledge past that. 4 to 5 years ago, we brought Michelle Vogel on board, and she really came with a lot of experience in the industry, and we wanted to develop this advocacy department, and Michelle was an ideal candidate, and fortunately, we were able to convince her to come on board, and I kind of told her some of what I wanted her to achieve, and she came to me and she said, "Hey, that's great. The first thing, I want to introduce you to this community. I want to introduce you to the myositis community. Let's go do a talk at a KIT group in Houston." And this is the first KIT group I went to. And I said, "Great, this sounds good. I'll go down there and I will share, my knowledge about IVIG and see if I can't be helpful." And so that's what we did. And I left that meeting with a brand new perspective. And I guess the biggest part of that was I realized first how little I knew about myositis, how well educated the patient community was, how much I could learn from the community, and then how much really needed to be done to improve things and improve treatment and outcomes. And so that really became a go. And we've worked really closely with the TMA and other myositis groups since then. So real quickly before we get started, and we're going to try to leave as much time for questions as we can. I am the CEO and co-founder of CSI Pharmacy. We're a nationwide provider of specialty medications. We work, predominantly our focus is complex and rare diseases. Of about 80% of what we do is immune globulin therapy. That's really what got us started, and so it is a true specialty in that way. Pretty involved throughout the industry with the patient groups, and then I'm a member of the standards committee with the Immune Globulin National Society, where as a pharmacist we write standards of care and attempt to advance the practice of IG really across the nation. And one thing to mention is that we specialize in myositis, and I don't really want to make this about CSI Pharmacy. It's more just to really give you a background. About 20% of our patients have myositis, and that is a large percentage for such a rare disease. And really the way that has come about is through these partnerships I'd mentioned earlier and through working with TMA, now sponsoring Myositis Support and Understanding, working with physician partners, Hopkins Myositis Center of Excellence. We do a lot of work with them. And so it's now become a really big part of what we do. And again, over the past 5 years, I've learned a tremendous amount. And I just want to kind of share today some of my experiences with IG and hopefully give some information that can help you in the home or in the clinic setting, hospital setting, wherever you may be receiving your therapy, or if you're considering it, where you learn more about it. But our goals today are going to be to learn what is immune globulin therapy. Okay, so what is IVIG or sub-Q IG? What does that mean? How can it be individualized, which really comes down to brand selection, talk about the hydration and infusion rate, with our goal being with individualization is to prevent adverse effects as much as we can, so it's tolerable and you continue and you have a higher quality of life when you do receive those treatments, but also to improve outcomes from that as well and increase compliance. And then Michelle is going to go into how to choose the right insurance plan, talk about IVIG and sub-Q IG coverage, getting it approved and fighting for it, and then some updates on shortages and other new developing events in the industry. So what is IVIG? So simply put, okay, so if we really just had to break it down, IV stands for intravenous, right? So into a vein. IG stands for immune globulins. So it's intravenous immune globulins. It could easily say, and will say, and some of you are on this therapy, SCIG, or subcutaneous immune globulins, which is under the skin. And immune globulins are really, a fancy word for antibodies. Okay, so they're antibodies, that component of your immune system that helps you fight infections. It has a variety of roles physiologically, and there's 5 different antibodies that we know of, and we're gonna talk about IgG. Okay, so that's the primary component that's in immune globulin therapy. I like to summarize it as the workhorse of the immune system. It's the antibody that's out there recognizing foreign pathogens, bacteria, viruses. It activates a system called complement that attacks them and helps you fight off these infections and prevent these infections from ever developing. With IVIG, we have 10 brands of IVIG, 3 brands specifically to sub-Q IG. Some can be given either way. They come from plasma pools. That's where it comes from. So when you donate plasma, you have 1,000 to 60,000 different donors that create a pool of plasma that is then used to extract these antibodies. The primary component I mentioned was IgG. And then just quickly, because I'll mention this again, that there's the different brands, and we'll talk briefly about those. Well, they're generally considered to be equally effective. The key is they have different side effect profiles and are tolerated differently from one patient to the next, which I know you guys are very experienced in the fact that each of us are a little bit different, especially those with these rare diseases. There's not really such thing as a cookie cutter therapy. But IVIG is a plasma product. So as I mentioned earlier, it comes from plasma. At TMA this year in Kentucky at the Muhammad Ali Center, I met a gentleman there. I believe his name was Jim. He may be on here tonight. If so, thank you, Jim, for this information. But he had donated 60 gallons of plasma over the years. I believe his spouse had myositis, and 60 gallons of plasma. So what happens when you donate that plasma? Well, plasma is about 55% of your blood volume. But from there, when we collect that plasma, most of it's water. And you can see here in this slide that almost 92% of that is water, and only 7% of that is proteins. Well, it's that 7% of proteins that we're really looking at. And that in those proteins are a variety of different molecules that play a different role in your body. Albumin being one, and albumin is used for certain treatments. Factor products are used for hemophilia, but it's that 38% of those proteins at the bottom that's immune globulins or antibodies that we're really interested in talking about tonight. I love this little slide here because and I hope you can see everything to the right. You may not be able to with the videos, but you can look at this later, I'm sure. This is an illustration that a patient actually created with her husband, her caregiver, and I thought it was brilliant. It's a patient who's on IG therapy for a diagnosis of dysautonomia. So it's a little bit different than myositis, but it's an autoimmune disorder all the same. And they made this illustration and I thought they did a great, really brilliant job of showing what IgG is in a level we all can understand. And you see these inside this cartoon, inside the bottle of what's GammaGuard 10% there, you see these little Y-shaped characters. Well, that represents immune globulins, specifically IgG, the primary component, and that's because it's shaped like a Y. And so they drew these little characters, and they're all a little bit different. Just like when you donate plasma and these antibodies are collected, there's millions of different functions for these antibodies, and they're specific. One of them will recognize, as this shows, fought cancer in Memphis. One of the other little cartoons says, "Hey, I'm Ted, and I'm a response to bad chicken." This is my favorite. The character talking to Ted says, "Hey, have you seen Sandra? Bad Sushi Sandra?" And, so it's kind of a creative way to show, hey, these antibodies are out there. They're all different. And you can see Sandra's at the very bottom. You can barely see the top of her down there. And she's saying, hey, you only live once. And, so I thought that was a great illustration to kind of break it down and, have some fun with it too. But to show, hey, there's millions of these that all do specific things. Antibodies fight off harmful substances in the body is the main row. What is important is that these antibodies have the ability to recognize self versus non-self, or good tissues versus pathogens that it needs to attack. Well, that becomes a problem with autoimmune disorders such as myositis, where these what's called autoantibodies, which are just antibodies your body's making, they incorrectly label a healthy, normal part of the body as harmful. And unfortunately, those antibodies then do damage to your body. And there's a variety of types. This slide actually came from a manufacturer called Octapharma, so I want to give them credit for letting me borrow this. But some of you have seen these and been tested for these myositis-specific autoantibodies. There's others that are associated with myositis, but also associated with other disorders. And many of you may say, yes, I have the Jo-1 autoantibody. But what they are antibodies that incorrectly are labeling a normal part of the body as being harmful and attacking that part of the body, causing damage, which in turn is causing muscle weakness and all the other symptoms that we're seeing with myositis that you're experiencing is coming from the damage to these tissues. IVIG works by lowering the levels of those bad antibodies. I promised Michelle that I would hurry, so I'm gonna watch my time real quick. But yeah, IVIG kind of works like a thermometer, okay, in your house, and you know how your thermometer measures the temperature. If it gets too hot, it's going to cut off the heater. And with IVIG, you give these antibodies, and so you get these high levels of antibodies in your system, and it tells your system to cut off the production of antibodies. And so what you get is you get a lower amount of those bad autoantibodies that are attacking your cell, a higher level of antibodies from 6,000 to 60,000 different folks across the nation who donated that aren't attacking your body, and the tissues are allowed to heal. So quickly, I'm going to go through the products here, and I'm going to name them really quick, but I told you there were 10. You've got Carimune, Cavutru, Fleba-Gamma, GammaGuard, Liquid GammaGuard SD, GammaCAD, GammaPlex, Gamunex, Hizentra, Hycuvia, Octagam, Privigen. Some of these are in different concentrations, but I wanted to list the names because you may hear the one that you're familiar with if you're receiving this therapy now. This chart lists the manufacturers, and it goes on to list the indications. And the real reason I include this is because if you look at these indications, what do we not see there? It's myositis. And, so that can create challenges because the FDA really regulates how drugs can be marketed if they don't have approved indications, and assistance programs and a lot of things. But don't lose heart. There is lots of data that show how effective IG is in myositis. It's a rare disease, so we don't see a lot of companies investing money into it. But we can get those approved, and the standards of care that say this is what needs to be given. And so getting the approval is really not always difficult if the right criteria are met. And sometimes it can be challenging, but it can be met and beaten. And Michelle will talk about that. And then quickly on the right over there, which is fine. You don't need to go back where you can. But Octapharma had just came out with Panziga, so that was a new one that we're now using for patients. They had orphan drug status for dermatomyositis in July 2017. And there's a phase 3 trial now looking at Octagam and dermatomyositis. And newly developing, my understanding is from Michelle, she's hearing that CSL is looking at starting a study of Hizentra in dermatomyositis. And it's really what we need for this community. If we can get an approved indication, it'll make a huge difference. So individualizing therapy. Okay, and again, this comes back to prevention of adverse effects. Okay, we want you to be able to tolerate this. We don't want you to not be able to receive IG because the side effects are too difficult to tolerate. We want to make sure you can get this important therapy. And so our best bet is let's try to prevent them from happening in the first place, before you ever get your first infusion. And some of the ways we do that is we look at product selection. So one brand, we can take an educated guess might be better for you than another brand. Of course, it is just an educated guess, so it's not always correct. But hydration and pre-medications are very important. The rate is extremely important. So I'm going to talk about those two items over and over. Infusion rate, hydration. And then individualized therapy by treating them if they do occur. And then finally changing the future, customize the future infusions as to prevent them from occurring again. So real quick statement is over the years, IG manufacturers have tweaked their formula. And they've done that to improve product safety, and they've done a great job with that. Each formula is a little bit different, and so they all have IgG, and so they're all kind of considered equally effective, but they have different amounts of IgG monomers, dimers, aggregates. The different antibodies that are in it besides IgG. There's different amounts of stabilizers, or different stabilizers, different additives and impurities, and all these lead to different side effect profiles and small little differences where one person may tolerate brand A greatly and another one not tolerate it at all, but can take brand B, but vice versa. One may just be well suited. And then again, by appropriate product selection, we can reduce the rate of adverse drug reactions, which is what we're going for. I'm not going to go into any detail on this because we do want to save time for questions, but this is how we would select a product that we think would be best for you. We're going to look at your what's called comorbidities, a fancy word for saying what other health conditions or health issues are occurring besides just the myositis. And for example, I'll just use one for example. If you have diabetes, the fifth one down, we're going to choose a IVIG product that doesn't have any sugar content. This is a simple one to understand. But also the same goes for a lot of other health issues, cardiac impairment, where you're looking at fluid restriction. I'd be happy to go into any detail about this because it's one of my favorite subjects. But for tonight, we don't want to waste a lot of time when Michelle's got some really good information coming. IVIG and sub-Q IG dosing. I put this in there because there is a lot of misunderstanding about dosing in autoimmune disorders and myositis. IVIGs are originally approved for immune deficiencies, and those patients typically get low doses, like a fourth or a fifth of the dose that a myositis patient will get. And so with IVIG, a good dose that you see, and this is all determined by your physician, but we do consult with physicians sometimes about this. A good dose is usually 2 grams per kilogram IV divided over a number of days, once a month. And then they kind of adjust it according to how you're doing. Subcutaneous, there's the dosing of this right now, it's kind of all over the map. I put on there a dose in case you do talk to your physician that we're seeing a lot of working with a Center of Excellence and some of the top physicians in the field. And we're using the same 2 grams per kilogram per month, but dividing that out into weekly or twice weekly. And one of the members on here today was talking to me. They actually do it daily, which I think is a exciting way to look at tailoring it for themselves as well. So what are some of the infusion reactions? And some of you may experience some of these. Aseptic meningitis is a big one that, from my understanding, not having ever experienced it personally, is extremely debilitating. People who have, patients we've had who experienced aseptic meningitis, they're really gun shy about getting IG again. So, yeah, and the truth is, we do not see a lot of aseptic meningitis, and I truly believe it's because We're infusing we're infusing this IVIG slowly. We're making sure patients are well hydrated when they can be ahead of time, and that's the best way to prevent it. And then you see headaches during the infusion or after the infusion. There's things we can do to prevent that. Flu-like symptoms, dermatological or rashes. There'll be sometimes an allergic reaction to one of the components. We can give antihistamines or steroids or switch the brand to prevent that in the future. Anaphylactic reactions is a big one. A lot of people are scared about anaphylactic reactions, whether you're in the home, infusion suite, or hospital. True anaphylactic reaction to IVIG is extremely rare. And over the course of those almost 20 years, I only know of 2 cases that may have been true anaphylactic reaction. The reason I want to really mention it is it's important to make sure that there is a protocol in place if you're receiving IVIG. What we call an ana kit is set to the side so your nurse or if you're in a physician's office, your physician has access to what they may need to treat that right away. Rigors, severe back and leg pain, thromboembolic events is clots. There's certain risk factors for that, and there's things we can do to mitigate the risk of that. And so when you have one of those risk factors, we're going to do things to work out with you and your physician to try to make sure we really reduce the risk of developing a thromboembolic event. And then anemia, again, there's things we can do with selected different products. What's not listed that needs to be listed that I noticed after I submitted the slides is renal failure. And you hear a lot of people talk about renal failure. It tends to slip my mind a lot, even though it's a black box warning for it in the literature. And it's mainly seen with sucrose-containing products, which are rarely used anymore. But they can still occur with others. Prevention of adverse reactions. So again, so just kind of summarize what we just talked about. We can choose a product that's best fitted for you. We pre-medicate with times to prevent these. And the 2 in bold are the ones I really want you to walk away with. Adequate hydration, slow infusion rate. The 2 best things you can do is be hydrated, slow infusion rate. Just make sure if you're fluid restricted, you have a plan in place with your pharmacist, nurse, and physician with regards to that. And then treatment of these reactions, again, it's really specific to what you may be dealing with, but there's a lot of things we can do that starts with slowing the infusion rate, administering IV fluids. We can give steroids. None of that works. We may try a different brand, but importantly, I wanted to get this across. A lot of these systemic type reactions are a lot less with subcutaneous IG than what we see with IVIG. So that's always an option. If you can't tolerate IVIG and your physician feels it appropriate, we can move to subcutaneous. And there's 3 brands that are approved specifically that are just subcutaneous, and that's Hizentra, Hycuvia, and Cuvutru. There's 3 others that can be administered IV or subcutaneous. And you can see the picture there of just how that's done in the stomach. For example, it can be done in other sites as well, but in the stomach's a common place, and it's just a sub-needle set going in. And you can learn to do this yourself.
Hey, James.
Yes. Yes.
This is Jerry. For those, I don't have my video on at the moment, but the reason that I wanted to just mention this before I forget later, the reason that I ended up switching to the subcutaneous IG is because of the lack of being able to tolerate it. I ended up having strokes. So I don't want to scare anybody away from IVIG, but some of these things can be very serious for people. And if IG, you find that it does work for you, then, I just love, that there are options now. And I thank you for pointing those out and just sharing those.
Hey, I am so glad you shared that. And, I have to be really careful when giving these talks because a lot of times I will paint sub-Q as being harmless, which it isn't true, but it is. I believe it's the future of treating autoimmune disorders like myositis. I think we're going to see more and more of it. We have manufacturers now really starting to invest in these groups to get these indications. It's you give it more frequently, but you can learn to give it yourself. Which go ahead and go to the next slide because that's exactly what we're talking about here is potential benefits of sub-Q IG. You get given it weekly or twice weekly or daily, you get a consistent level of IgG in your system instead of these huge peaks and these troughs. And so, my theory is that, which is I guess yet to be proven, but at least studies are taking place that may help slow the progression of the disease or maintain the prevention of a relapse of symptoms better than these peaks and valleys. And I guess that remains to be seen, but it is effective. Lots of patients are doing great with it, and it's tolerated really well. Insurance is the challenge, and Michelle's going to talk about that. I'm going to let her go into that, but no more pre-meds, or often pre-meds aren't used. Side effects are localized, like may get reactions to where it's administered, or sometimes there's a bolus that left there by a certain product in particular. But you can learn to do it yourself, and it's great for patients who have poor venous access and a port's not right for them. You can do it under the skin without having to start an IV. But I'm going to go over to Michelle from here.
I'm going to talk about health insurance plans. So I'm not sure which health insurance plans people have, but we'll talk about Medicare, and if you have traditional or supplemental plans, Part D or Advantage plans. And Medicaid, you can have expansion states, Veterans Affairs, TRICARE, Federal Employees Health Benefit Plans, employer-sponsored plans. You have choice of plans in there. Healthcare market plans like Affordable Care Act. Healthcare sharing plans, which we often call faith-based plans. Other individual plans. So how does health insurance make you feel? And I use emojis because it makes you feel all kinds of ways. So these often are good ways to make you explain how it makes you feel. And we'll go into what's in store for healthcare. And so I'm going to use the perfect storm. And so right now we have elimination of patient choice, increased costs of insurance and drugs, destabilization of the Affordable Care Act, and the other big thing is shortage of IG, which I didn't put in here, and the Trump health plans, which I'm going to talk about. So what's happening is with the destabilization of the Affordable Care Act, which I'm going to talk about, driving up costs of health insurance plans in the marketplace, the introduction of the cheap health plans, which are our Trump plans, with no protections for the most vulnerable populations needing the most effective and expensive therapies, equal the perfect storm. So what are the current threats for patients with myositis? I'm going to go into all of these. So I'm going to go quickly into this. So the Affordable Care Act, what it did to help rare disease patients, we eliminated the elimination of pre-existing conditions. So we put protections in place for patients. We did something so we put limits in place of the amount of insurance companies can require policyholders to pay in out-of-pocket expenses, such as co-payments and deductibles. We made changes. We didn't do all enough, but we made some changes in those costs. And we put individual mandates so that the health insurance companies couldn't fine families. So those were some changes that we put eliminations on there. We didn't go far enough, but we did some changes there. We eliminated lifetime and annual caps. We prevented insurance companies from dropping us when we got sick. And we're trying to close that donut hole under Medicare Part D. But just this past year, Congress changed things, and now the whole Affordable Care Act is in jeopardy, which means, and the most important thing is that pre-existing conditions are back in play. So it's in the courts, and we're going to have to watch it and see what happens. And we have to see if Congress is going to go back and put pre-existing condition protections in place. So my biggest concern and suggestion to everybody is make sure you're insured. And it was before we said this, don't let your insurance lapse, and it's back in play again. Make sure your insurance doesn't lapse, because I'm concerned, again, if it does lapse, if you're going to have those protections in place for us. In terms of the Trump plans, this is what you have to be concerned about. These are really short-term plans. There's no protection for pre-existing conditions. They don't have protections for any prescription drug coverage. Nothing for people who are pregnant, no mental disorders. They have nothing for outpatient prescription drug coverage. These are really short-term plans. And so this is not something that any of us would go and get coverage for. So you do not want to look at these as alternatives for the marketplace. They're cheap and you get what you pay for. So you do not want to look at that. Healthcare sharing plans. Again, this is something that's come up that I didn't know that much about until I was dealing with patients who needed IVIG and came to me. And there were quite a number of myositis patients who said, I've got this great health insurance. It only costs $300 to $500 per month for my family. But they're saying it doesn't cover IVIG. Looked into it for them. And sure enough, it doesn't. And it's the faith-based plans. They don't even cover insulin. So they're not going to cover IG. And they send you to Needy Meds, GoodRx, OneRx, and Lowest Meds. So no maintenance prescriptions are eligible for patients in these plans. So again, if it looks too good to be true, it is. It's not going to cover you. So you cannot be in these plans if you've got a disease like our diseases. So we've got to look at better plans and figure out how to afford these plans. Medicare, I'm going to give you these helpful hints. If you go into traditional Medicare, your Part A, your hospital, if you're in the hospital, that's going to cover your IG if you're inpatient. And if your Part B is your physician infusion suites, your outpatient infusion suites. Your Part D is your home infusion. So that's the big difference. Home infusion is under Part D, physician hospital is under Part B. The donut hole. Many people will think that you cannot afford to get covered for your infusions under Part D. You can. If you go and you talk to your home infusion company, ask them for help. A lot of them have assistance programs. So just ask them. They're not going to be able to advertise it, but they will have it for people who are on fixed incomes, who are on disability, on Medicare, even if you're not completely low income, but you're on a fixed income, just ask them for help and they will offer it to you. Supplemental plans. This is the most important issue that I can talk about, and just make sure you remember this. If you are going on disability, you must sign up for supplemental within the first 6 months. After that, you will not have an opportunity to get your supplemental or Medigap policy until you're 65 years old. Then when you're 65, you must sign up for your supplemental within the first 6 months. If not, everything's considered a pre-existing condition and you won't be able to get coverage. Medicare Advantage plans, the biggest issue, and you have to weigh it. It does limit your network of providers, but there are HMOs and there are PPOs. The HMOs are limiting specialty drugs. They have put in place step therapy, so you have to use your steroids. You have to show you fail other therapies before you're going to get to the IG or the Rituxan. The other thing I want to say, Rituxan is never covered in the home. It's always covered in the physician office or in the hospital, never in the home care setting. Also, under your Medicare Advantage plan, sometimes you need permission to go out of state, and that's the HMO. Most of the PPOs will allow you to go out of state. So you just need to look, but it's more affordable. So I can understand why people need to look at those. They're not bad plans. You just have to shop. If you need help, I'm more than happy to help you look at these plans. I am one of those people who like to look at insurance plans and help people look at these. Private insurance and Medicare. So I'm there to help you navigate.
You are a rare one indeed.
My next favorite topic is prior authorization. So this cartoon, did you get prior authorization before you became ill? This is a major issue. Understanding prior authorization. It's an extra step that most insurance companies require before they decide if they're going to pay for expensive specialists, procedures, and specialty therapies like medications. I can't stress enough that you need to ensure that you go through the prior authorization process. The insurer requests to look at your medical records, your test results, all the information to make an informed decision. If you're going through IG, and especially sub-Q, they're going to go through a prior authorization. For sub-Q, they'll want to look at journal articles to show that it's medically necessary, to look at all the records and show that the medical literature, it shows that it will that it's not experimental. You put together a good prior authorization packet and work with a good provider, they will get this approved for you. But if a provider says you don't need to go through a prior authorization and you believe that, and then all of a sudden later on, they say you didn't get the authorization and they bill you, you will end up owing the money. So make sure you are shown that your insurance does not require a prior authorization, and don't believe it. Get it in writing from the provider. So because I have not seen a policy that doesn't need a prior authorization. It is very, very rare. You are denied appeal. Most times you will win your appeal. Insurance companies bank on you not appealing. So appeal, appeal, appeal. That's what I always say. Patient choice is my other big issue. I don't know if people are seeing that you're being forced to change providers. You're not able to go to the pharmacy. You have to go to a certain pharmacy. You have to go to a certain lab. That you're no longer able to receive a brand of therapy, that there's new formularies that you have to follow, that you may not be able to go to a specialist that you like to go to. This is all a new thing with elimination of patient choice. This is going to continue to be a trend that we're going to be going through with our healthcare. And I'm not sure how we fight this, but it's going to be a fight that we need to take up. I think it's a really important issue. Okay, and this is another issue that will come up. It comes up always, IG shortages. Plasma is a resource, and so we go through shortages every once in a while, and we're in a shortage now. It is a nationwide shortage. The FDA has listed 3 brands right now on their shortage list: Gamaplex from BPL, and Shire Takeda's 2 brands, GammaGuard Liquid and the sub-Q product QV-True. It doesn't mean you can't get these products. It's just in more limited supply. Most distributors have put all brands now on allocation, and what allocation means is that to make sure that no brand sits on a shelf somewhere or nobody is stockpiling product. They're making sure that product is going out as soon as it comes in to all of the patients to make sure it's getting out there. And that's when we have a tight supply. And it's going to get tighter because the summer months, the manufacturing plants close down at different times to be cleaned. So you're going to see that. If you're being told that you can't get your infusion because of a nationwide shortage, or that you're not high enough priority because of your disease, that's not acceptable. And I want contact me and I will help you personally. I will try to find out who is the distributor and try to figure out or get in touch with the manufacturer and find out how we get your product. You do not have to be a CSI patient for me to help you. I just want to make sure you're getting your infusion on time. So what's the future? So we pray for our insurance coverage and everything else. This is a hard topic, but we all need to be our own advocates. That's number one. Number two, we need to be knowledgeable what's in our health insurance plan and how to choose the right plan for our needs. And so when open season comes up, you can call me. I'm more than happy to help you. Don't assume that your plan is the same plan as last year. Employer-based plans are carving out your prescription drug benefits. For our Medicare patients, if you need help looking at your Part D plans and see if you're in the best plan for your drugs, let me know and we can put it in our program and see if you're in the best plan for you. We're going to see more high deductible plans being introduced. States are having less protection, so we have to see how that's happening. And we can look at the Medicare Advantage and see if you're in an HMO, maybe look at a PPO if you're getting less choices. So let's go on to Q&A because I want to give us as much time as possible to answer your questions.
So everybody, if you haven't given us a question during the chat, you can unmute your audio now and ask Michelle.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Would you like to go ahead and discuss your sub-Q question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, certainly can.
Okay, good. Yes, I've switched to sub-Q IG, and in fact, I'm infusing right now, which is why I'm blacked out there. And in my abdominal area stays really bloated. I mean, during the whole week, this is my third week. And I mean, I've went from a 32-inch waistline to love handles and muffin top, and we had an education nurse the first couple of weeks, and she did a great job. And she's thought that was not unusual for my stomach to be so distended for the entire week. I don't know what your experience is with that, or if you have any maybe solutions for maybe reducing the amount of bloat that I have in my stomach. It's not really uncomfortable, except for the fact that it feels like I'm carrying around an extra 3 or 4 inches around my waist.
What product are you on? Is it Hizentra?
Hizentra.
It is Hizentra.
Yes.
All right. So in general, most of the time our expectations are that you will get that fluid buildup in that subcutaneous space, and it may be there for 48 to 72 hours.
Wow.
Shorter term. What I thought we may do, and Brittany, I don't know if you're good to chime in here, but I actually noticed that our director of nursing is on this call with us, and she's unmuting herself, but she has a lot of experience with teaching subcutaneous and administering subcutaneous therapy. You want to take that question, Brittany?
Hey everyone. So for the sub-Q, for the sites, it depends how many sites you're doing.
8.
And 8 sites. And are you using your legs and all?
I'm using just my stomach area and oblique area.
And you said how often are you infusing?
Once a week.
And you're doing 8 sites. I would see if you broke it up and you did 4 sites in your belly and 2 sites on each leg.
Wow.
That difference. I usually do 2 sites in my abdomen and 1 site in each leg, but I infuse twice a week.
Okay.
That would be something you could also do, is break up your infusion. And so then you wouldn't have as much fluid all at once to build up under the tissue. Because usually for myself, at 20 grams twice a week, the fluid lasts maybe a day. Usually by the next morning, I don't really notice a spot.
Wow.
So that's something to look at because it is flexible. You just kind of have to see what's going to work for you.
Would you suggest a medial thigh or lateral thigh, or I'm just right in the middle?
So it depends because really you can use any portion on the upper thigh there. I like a little more of the inner spot where there's a little more fatty tissue.
Yes.
That's usually where I go. But really, if you have the Hizentra journal, do you have that or the Hizentra app?
Well, we'll look for that. We'll look for that.
Okay, because if you have the actual welcome kit from Hizentra that your nurse should have brought with you the first visit, in there it gives you a journal and it shows you all the sites you can go. So you can use your belly, you can use your legs, the back of your arms, the back of your flank area, your lower back. So there's a lot of sites, and in the journal it shows you all those sites, and then you can actually mark where you went, so you know you're always rotating the sites.
We found that. We just now found that. Thank you for that information.
Sure. And the app does the same thing. So if you are tech savvy and like the app, you can actually download the Hizentra app, mark the sites that you went, and it'll show you the diagram as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
You're welcome.
Thanks so much, Brittany. We appreciate that.
Glad you joined.
Yes.
I've been listening.
Michael, does that help you?
It does very much, because we're just looking to. We were doing the IVIG for 8 or 9 months, and we just went through. I was originally on Gamma-Plex, and each 2 weeks post infusion, and no one has heard of this before, but each week, 2 weeks post infusion, I would get a full body rash. Not right after, but 2 weeks post infusion, and then we switched from Gamma-Plex to Gamma-Guard, and it seems like it was going to move a little better, but for several reasons, we wanted to move to the subcutaneous, and we're much more hopeful with that. And not only that, but I guess the second question I would have, someone had told me one time that IG therapy, this is a generalization, either works very well or not at all. I don't know if that was just a major generalization. It seems like I'm kind of baseline and not really improving yet, but we've only been on the sub-Q for 3 weeks, so I'm hopeful. I'm planning to keep at it and see what happens. And the convenience factor is major as well. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And I'm thinking that with the Gamma-Plex, likely it was some kind of reaction to maybe one of the constituents of the Gamma-Plex. And I had not only my doctor, but I served as a subject for the Kentucky Dermatological Society, and had 50 doctors looking at me when I had the full body rash, and they were just all shrugging their shoulders. And by the way, we sat in on James's presentation at the National Convention in Louisville, and it was fabulous, and I appreciate that. You enjoyed that.
I'm glad you were there. Thank you.
Yes.
Just quickly on the, either responding to it or not, I'm not sure I really, would agree that was a true, I know you said generalization. I can tell you that there are folks that respond really well, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There's others that it takes 5-6 months before they start seeing what they consider, better results. And we've had patients who simply felt like they weren't going backwards.
Right.
And, and we hope that those are fewer and far between than those who really feel like they have a lot of results. But it has been kind of all over the place. And I think it really depends probably a lot more on the diagnosis, what type of myositis. But, there's a lot there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I believe, Tanya, did you raise your hand? Did you have a question?
Well, I had my first IVI treatment, and I had 70, milligrams. And I also had an allergic reaction, but it took a week to set in. it wasn't a full body rash, but it was from like my waist up to my face.
Mm-hmm.
So a week ago, they gave me 5 milligrams to see if I could tolerate it. And so far, I haven't had any issues. So I guess next week I'm going to have the full dose again, but I'm kind of a little nervous.
Well, and I actually, I don't know if there's a way to share my email address or our email addresses, but you could certainly, I could put it on our Facebook site or maybe on our website, Michelle, but I can get you some more information.
At the end of our presentation, but we can definitely get it. But the pre-meds, what kind of pre-meds are you doing?
I'm just on prednisone. I alternate between 4 and 5 milligrams.
So what Michelle's about to get at, maybe Michelle just wants to answer it, but yeah, I mean, in that situation, we would really definitely look at adding histamine, like a Benadryl or a Zyrtec or a
well, I did actually, now that you mention it, I did take Zyrtec 3 days before.
Okay.
Did they do Tylenol and Benadryl?
When I went last week for the second dose, that was only 5 milligrams. Yeah, I had Benadryl and I had, I don't think Tylenol, but I think just Benadryl.
Yeah, I've got some great information on that. There's a lot of options. There's adding steroids beforehand. There's switching to a different product because likely it is an allergic reaction to some impurity or component of that brand. And then subcutaneous is a good option if a lot of that stuff doesn't work. But I'll share what I have on that. I have a couple of paragraphs on how to manage and prevent dermatological reactions and rashes. Okay,
cool. That'd be great. And then how long usually, I mean, I still feel itchy, but it's not as bad, just like a tad.
Well, so that's usually it's not long. Usually it's 2 or 3 weeks. We have had one patient in particular, a polymyositis patient, who did have a rash and itching that took months to clear up. I mean, it was really odd, but she's a one-offer, so I don't want you to make that your expectations.
No.
Yeah, but we've had one that's been long-term, but for the most part, it's usually 2 or 3 weeks. I mean,
yeah, this is the 3rd week, so I'm assuming it'll go away.
Is it getting a little bit better as you go?
It's way better than it was. I mean, I still have a tad, but I mean, the first week or 2, I was just like, I felt like I had the chicken pox or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you this. I'm gonna send you this information, and you feel free to share it with your physician, prescriber, and the nursing and pharmacy team. And it comes out of our standards, RIG standards, and it's really good information.
Gina's question was, what is the objective criteria that must be met for IVIG? She has DM.
And she is in Canada.
Is that for insurance, is she asking?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. I have had IVIG.
Oh, okay. There she is.
I had 2 runs of it, but my GP has ordered it because I'm on prednisone. I can only go to 6 milligrams. I'm on Imurin. I'm on Plaquenil. And the problem is I have serious infections and weight loss and muscle wasting ongoing. That's why I got the first run of IVIG, 3 of them. And then they quit them. And then I had a same problem this year, and then they gave me another run of 3. And I don't know what the criteria is. That's what my physician's wondering. What is the criteria for being able to be okayed for the treatment?
You're there, but do you want me to take it, Michelle, or you?
No, go ahead, James.
Yeah, so for the most part, and I'm speaking from insurance standpoint, which is based off of medical studies and guidelines, and but yeah, so typically steroids would commonly be a first step that you would see in most patients, right? And then it's either tolerated, not tolerated, works or doesn't work, or works for a while and then stops. And then you'll see the addition of those immune suppressants that you mentioned. So you've got Imuran, Cellcept, Plaquenil, different immune suppressants that you'll use. That's usually step 2 or right in there. IVIG with most insurance companies, and I think it's because this is there's lots of data in the literature that support this, is usually the option to go to in patients who have been on prednisone and can't take it, or it's not working effectively, who have tried other immune modulators or immune suppressants, and it's either not, you can't tolerate it, or it's not working to the full extent of what your physician feels is a good response or a full response. IVIG is typically approved in those cases. You said dermatomyositis, right? Especially dermatomyositis.
This is Canada. So
I'm speaking. Yes, I was speaking from my experience.
Yeah.
So you might jump on.
So if you can let me know which province you're in Canada, I'm more than happy to take a look and try to find the guidelines and get that to you. So if you email me your contact information, and what province are you in?
Province? I'm in British Columbia, but there aren't guidelines there. There aren't like those kind of guidelines.
Well,
yeah.
There were guidelines being developed in Canada because I was getting contacted from people that were doing some things in Canada. But I could look at the manufacturers have published certain guidelines, and so have the medical community. So I can try to pull up some of that and see what the medical community guidelines are for myositis and see if that would be able to be helpful to you.
I am going to see an immunologist, so that might help. They might be more clear about what.
But there may be there may be some guidelines from some of the rheumatologists coming from Canada. So I can try to get in touch with there was a big international myositis medical conference. And I could see what came out of that and see which Canadian doctors came from that and try to see if there's any literature. So I'm more than happy to find out. I'll contact the representatives that came out of the U.S. to see who was represented from Canada and see what they may know, what the health system is looking, what they know, what your healthcare system is looking for with guidelines, if there are. But I know that there's a bunch of patients who've contacted me in terms of IVIG criteria. So let me see what I can get and email that to you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I see
You're welcome.
Here. Thank you.
Hey, and Gina, if I could just follow up quickly with something on that for you to note. And yeah, as far as Canada, it's definitely out of my knowledge base, but I can say from a clinically perspective, and what we usually see from the physicians that we work with and partner with, and obviously your physician knows you better than someone who hasn't seen you, but from a criteria standpoint there, you're usually at the step that IVIG is considered. One thing I kind of want you to note is you mentioned the frequent infections. Did you say did you say infections? Yes. Yeah, the frequent infections. So, that's particularly concerning because you're on the immune suppressants, right? And so you're on the Imuran, the prednisone, which is suppressing your immune system. Well, with IVIG, you get some degree of what's called passive immunity. It doesn't just beat down your immune system. You're getting antibodies from other people. And it could kind of, I would definitely mention that when talking to the insurance company that you're getting these infections and secondary infections from probably immune suppression.
Okay, does anyone else have a question?
Hi, Linda.
I failed IVIG pretty miserably four times. We tried 4 times, and I got aseptic meningitis 4 times. And it was confirmed by spinal tap 3 times. Well, anyway. So I did give sub-Q a try because aside from the meningitis, I definitely felt a change in my legs. I have dermatomyositis, but primarily I have some skin involvement, but it's primarily my muscles. But I did notice improvement in some stamina, some strength that I would get back in my legs, even mobility. So we tried sub-Q. I had one go with it, and I forget. I honestly forget 1 or 2 days. I was in and out of the hospital in that time frame too, so I'm kind of foggy with it. But I had started to get a headache, and not horrible. It was just kind of there. But I had terrible. I hate to say this for everybody, but terrible diarrhea. And the nurse, he looked it up. I mentioned it to him because it was pretty bad. And he had said that, that could be a side effect. And I think I had ended up in the hospital maybe a week later. We had snow, so then he couldn't come back. And then I ended up in the hospital again. And I just kind of, at that point, was just like, I'm putting everything on hold for right now. But I really want to give it a chance because I'm not having the greatest success with other treatments.
Right. So with the diarrhea, how long did it last? Was it a few days? Was it?
It was, I think it was into the 3rd day, and then I took Imodium.
And it's one time, right? So you tried this once over a couple of days, and then okay.
Yeah, I still have everything, and now we're deciding, whether. I mean, it's kind of up to me if I either just want to send everything back and continue on hold or go forward.
Yeah, so gastrointestinal side effects with subcutaneous IG is one of those things that, when you go look at the package insert, which tells you everything, it's there. It's definitely listed there. I think it's on the order of, just guessing, depending on which product, 3.5% to 4% of the patient population, but it's honestly pretty rare. And Michelle, I guess we don't see it very often,
And
now
I know it could have been a coincidence.
Yeah, right. But, so you're already rare, so it's potential that that is what it is. Personally, I would, if it wasn't so severe that it hospitalized you, or
no, it didn't.
Yeah, I would think maybe try it again. Obviously that's your decision, and talk to your physician, but it could be coincidence. And it could have been that specific lot. We've had a few patients who, IG is produced. Maybe there was something in that particular lot, which I really doubt that too, but it's potential that in future batches you don't have that issue with, because we have seen that. But I would want to make sure that it wasn't a coincidence, or it wasn't just timing or something else going on with you at that time or something specific to that infusion before you just wrote it off, especially since you've seen benefit. But yeah, it can occur. It is listed underneath the side effects. So whoever told you that, they looked it up and they're right, but it is pretty rare.
How long does it usually take for you to feel some kind of improvement? I'm suspecting it's an individual basis, but do they usually have like a time frame?
Do you want to answer it, Michelle?
I mean, some patients can get improvement over a few months. I mean, in others, it could be 6 months. But it usually can take, 2-3 months to really feel a big difference. It builds up over time. So some patients can feel it over a few months and they'll start feeling a big difference. Some patients could feel up to 6 months. I usually say if you don't see a difference by month 6, then we've got a problem. And then you need to be reevaluated by your physician that this therapy is not working, because in some cases we'll do a trial period. Like if an insurance company doesn't want to cover, I'll do a 6-month trial and see if this is going to work. And if it's not going to, if it doesn't do anything by the 6 months, then we've got a problem. But, some patients even feel a little better after the first month, but usually by month 2, month 3, you're really starting to feel better. And then adding physical therapy into it is even making a big difference. Your CK levels should be coming down, and you're really on your way of making a big difference. And so it all comes into play into your recovery.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Same experience. And a lot of times Michelle and I are working together with Brittany and other members of our team discussing this, but we get some that month one, it's like, wow, this is great. This is fantastic. Other, it takes a little bit longer, but yeah, I would say 6 months is a great time frame to say, if this isn't.
Evaluate, yeah. Yeah.
What's the regimen they usually give you? Because I'm doing every other week.
Yeah, great question. So intravenously, if we're talking about IV here and not subcutaneous, typically you'll see a dose, or what you'll see in the literature is 2 grams of IVIG per kilogram monthly. Okay, well, as I was kind of talking about earlier, when you do that, you get a big peak of IVIG in your system, and then over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it kind of slides off like this. And so after 3 weeks, your levels have kind of dropped back down to a point that those antibodies are coming back up and doing damage again. Your body's antibodies, the autoantibodies, are attacking the good tissue again because they're not low, because the exogenous or the IVIG you've given yourself has dropped below a level it's really effective. And so a lot of patients, what we've done by obviously coordinate with the physician, but go back and say, hey, we're seeing a return of symptoms at week 3. We may check. We may work with the physician and say, instead of 2 grams per kilogram every 4 weeks, we do 1 gram per kilogram every 2 weeks. And again, this is something where we're probably subcutaneous is even better than that, because we can maintain an even smoother level. But yeah, so we may give it more frequently, but typically once a month at least. So the half-life of IG is on the order of about 3 weeks, about 21 days. So after you give an infusion, 3 weeks later, it's really getting low.
And Brittany makes a good point in the chat about journaling, and that's something that we always promote in our groups is, the need to journal, and not even just specifically about IG, but like you mentioned, you're on steroids. So all of these different factors come into play. So say your doctor decides that he feels you're improving a little bit on the IG and wants to start a taper of steroids. So you're going to feel worse. A taper of prednisone, no matter what you're on, for most people, from what we've heard, you're going to feel it's just your body's trying to, readjust. So all those types of things come into play. And then if you were happen to get sick, it's all these little coincidences that kind of add up. And if you look back into your journal, you could say, oh, this is where it kind of started. We started tapering my prednisone, or, they decreased my IG dose or increased it, or, whatever the case is. So thank
you.
Yeah. Thanks, Brittany, for bringing that up. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This has been a very, very informative session. I didn't think there were still things I could learn about IG. I did. So thank you, James. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brittany. And we, just thank you again for your sponsorship of MSU and Myositis Awareness Month. The email addresses for James and Michelle are in the chat. If you need them and you're not able to get them from the chat, just email me or let us know in the group, tag me. Our email address is info@understandingmyositis.org.
It was very informative for me also. I've never fortunately had to go the IVIG route, but this is very helpful to understand. So.
Yes, very excellent presentation, guys. Thank you so much. And
thank you for the invitation too. That was really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and this has been, it's just empowering when we can sit down like this and talk to you guys who, you're the experts. You deal with this day in and day out, and just to have the ability to sit here and ask questions and learn from you, I think is empowering.
And it goes both ways, Jerry. So we get information here that we are able to use to help other people. And really that has been a huge part of our practice, is what we learn from you. So, it definitely goes back both ways, and really had a great time. So thanks for the invitation. Like to see you again. Yeah.
Yes, and everybody reach out, please. If you need help, please reach out. We're here to help you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of our family, guys.